I think HeartMath is phenomenal, and I really recommend that to all my patients. I like the Inner Balance app because they can carry it on their phone or their iPad. And I kind of tell everyone, well, you've got to take potty breaks. So every time you take a potty break, I want you to do at least one HeartMath, 1 3-minute, cycle.
Great tip.
Just because, it's like, how can we hack it, right? So that is one tool that I like because people love data. Before, maybe in other generations, data wasn't that inspiring or, people weren't driven by data, but now everyone loves data. So the more data you have, the more you're kind of, I think, empowered to make changes and to also see how you're changing and, have that kind of conversation with your body.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Mutzel here with HighIntensityHealth.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we're live with Dr. Alex Carrasco, and we're going to talk all about her cutting-edge advanced therapies in her functional medicine practice in Austin, Texas. But before we do, I want to let you know a little bit more about her. She did her undergraduate studies at Rice University, went on to University of Texas, where she became board certified in medicine and family medicine, and she's also board certified in integrative and alternative medicine as well. She did some research at MD Anderson University, which we're going to learn more about, and has a thriving practice now in Austin, Texas. So Dr. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so kind of you to have me on.
Maybe let's start off with your medical journey and kind of what got you into integrative functional medicine.
That sounds great. It's strange. Back when I was a child, I knew two things. I knew I wanted to be a mom and I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And I don't have any doctors in my family. And so it was something that really came from, I guess, within. When I went to college, I was on the pre-med path. And then what happened was I started learning more about, I guess I got into yoga, it was 19 or 20. I was like, oh my gosh, yoga, where has it been my whole life? And healthy eating and just really kind of disrupted my paradigm. And so I started doing a lot of reading. And around that time, I guess Andrew Weil had just come out with spontaneous healing. And I know that for like everyone, I feel like in the functional medicine world or in the integrative medicine world, that was a really, inspiring, captivating book that just was a game changer. And for me, it truly was. And so I thought, wow, that is so amazing that there's these different ways. And then I also started learning more about anthropology and indigenous cultures and just, working with herbals and botanicals and the power of that. And I realized, well, we don't do any of that in this country. Well, not at least in my circles. And so, I thought, well, there's got to be a better way. Back then, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician because I loved kids. But I thought, well, it's really hard to change just one person in the family's lifestyle, because at that time in my college years, I was MAing, working as an MA for a pediatrician in the summers. And I thought, well, you can't get the whole family healthy by just taking care of the kid. I mean, it's got to be like a whole approach. And that's where I thought, well, I want to be able to take care of everyone. I want to be able to, take care of people from birth to death and know the whole process. And so that's why I chose family medicine. And I had a wonderful time, delivering hundreds of babies and, sitting at the bedside of elders and, helping them transition to the next and everything in between. And before I did my residency in medical school, I got sick. I had just this massive panic attack, migraine, IBS issue that just occurred during my third year. And that's the year in medical school where you start your rotations. And so you're studying for the big board exams, and then you're starting to work in the hospitals and the clinics, and you're doing, probably 80 hours a week plus study on top of that. So it's the perfect antecedent and trigger situation. And then everything just fell apart.
Wow.
So I found myself in the ER several times, couple CAT scans later, lots of EKGs, and, lots of recommendations for some SSRIs and, nothing really useful. And I thought, this does not make sense. What is going on here? And so basically throughout that whole time, I was still very interested in integrative medicine and slowly trying to do my own work with yoga and nutrition. Although I'll tell you, my nutrition in med school was horrible. Who knew that? I thought coffee was really good for you. What? Right. And healthy choice isn't good. I mean, it's so sad, but really that was my reality, just surviving, quite honestly. And then what I did was I ended up rotating my fourth year with Andrew Weil for a month at the University of Arizona. And that was a real game changer for me in that I saw there was this whole other way especially his work, I feel like is really amazing for relaxation, spirituality, botanical uses of herbs, nutrition, and a lot of, I think, kind of parasympathetic support, which you never talk about at all in med school. But then I found that there were some things that were still missing because I couldn't completely heal myself. Right. And so when I went to an amazing conference called Food is Medicine in 2007, and I heard Mark Hyman speak there, and I'd never heard of functional medicine. And that's really where I was like, what? This is crazy. Oh my gosh. And that was the game changer for me.
So Dr. Andrew Weil's book kind of, spurred that creative thinking, which allowed you to kind of open doors to learn different things, and then functional medicine. So looking back on your story there, where you got really sick during medical school, what sort of, circumstances do you think that led to that final kind of, collapse in your health, so to speak? Like, was it stress? Was it nutrition, the combination of the two, or was it any one event? So maybe someone listening right now where they've been in a place like that, where they've been depressed and had multiple issues. What do you think was a major driver there?
Yes, and I see this in my practice all the time, but I think it's really kind of the culmination of a lot of external stressors. So number one, I think I was always, on a very driven path. I mean, very competitive academically in my high school, and then my undergrad, and then med school. It's like you kind of self-select to a harder atmosphere each place, and you're really kind of competing to pass and then to make good grades. So I think that was very stressful. I definitely think I was not sleeping well because I was working long hours and trying to study, and I think my nutrition was horrible. So I think the combination of inflammatory inputs and through poor nutrition and stressors is what really threw me over the edge. And I mean, God knows. Oh, let's also talk about my microbiome, right, because that was probably totally screwed up too. I mean, most 25-year-olds are on birth control, which I was at that time, and I was on anti-microbials for acne. Mm. So, and it was all kind of at the same time. So I really think I just had a lot of that soup that a lot of my patients end up having, just inflammatory trigger after inflammatory trigger after inflammatory trigger, and toxic triggers. And I also think probably, the body, the cleaning products and the personal care products I was using were horrible. I'm sure I was drinking water out of plastic, bottles. It's just like the whole picture was really messed up.
Right. Yeah. Back in the early 2000s or late 90s, right? That was when Nalgene was really hot. Remember those plastic bottles?
I had a hot pink Nalgene. I carried it everywhere.
Yeah. It was like the thing during college and high school. I mean, everyone had those for a period of time. And now we find out they had BPA and all the
Absolutely huge endocrine disruptor. I kept it in my car. I'd get like 110 degrees in San Antonio, and I'd take it to the library and sip on it all night long with my Starbucks. Yeah.
It was like the external sign that you're healthy if you had a Nalgene bottle.
Totally.
That's incredible. Looking at all those different pieces of the puzzle, maybe we can pick some of those apart, because you're working with people that are coming in, experiencing, symptoms like you had, and a lot of health issues and so forth, midlife, maybe parents and professionals. Let's maybe tease apart some of the, in a hierarchy, what's the most important, kind of foundational core issue, and how do you address that?
So I think what I often find, even if I have a patient that has advanced autoimmune disease, most people are still kind of in the mindset or in the paradigm that they just want that, even if it's a supplement fix, like, what supplements can you give me to make me better? And it's kind of like, well, it's not that simple. It's like an onion, and you've got to pull back all these layers. And there's a lot of things that really cause us to get out of balance. And I really think that number one, quite honestly, is it has to be stress, because we are just running our nervous system into the ground. I mean, the way that we live our life, I don't think is the way that, our creator intended for us to live our life. I mean, 10,000 generations of people didn't live, sitting in front of a computer all day, or driving in cars and doing this daily grind and working in jobs that are, unfulfilling but very stressful. So I think that is probably the number one foundation. I mean, I think that everyone figuratively is being chased by a lion all day long, and they are just upregulated until they can't upregulate, and then they're just crashing.
Right. So. And that's such a tough one. Maybe let's pause there and kind of discuss that a little bit further. I think that the stressing is really tough because, like you said, that the stress inputs are numerous and ubiquitous, and it takes. There's a few supplements, obviously adrenal adaptogens and so forth, that can help there, but a lot of the stress just comes by changing your mindset and doing mind-body therapies. So, what have you found, I guess, to be the most effective, and how do you convince patients that they have to meditate to really, or do yoga or prayer? Like, how do you get people to kind of adopt these mind-body therapies?
Well, I think the number one thing is, quite honestly, permission, because most of the patients I see don't feel like they have the permission to take care of themselves. They feel like that's selfish. That self-care and that self-restoration piece it's not a mandatory thing for them. It's just like an extra indulgence. And quite honestly, that's not true, but that's really what we've been, that's kind of what we've been trained to think, like, do the job and take care of the family and take care of everyone else. And then maybe there's some time for us, instead of filling our cup and, then using that fuel to take care of everyone else in our lives. So I think that, first, just giving yourself the permission and allowing yourself to have that and to create that kind of restoration in your life is number one.
So allowing people to realize that they need to heal themselves first so that they can be better parents or better kind of breadwinners or something along those lines. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then what have you found to be most effective, or is it individual? I mean, we've had, experts on heart math on the show, meditation experts. Do you let people kind of find what resonates with them and then explore that and expand on that, or maybe describe it?
I think that there's a few things that I really recommend to everyone. I think meditation is very powerful, but I think for someone that's coming into meditation from never having done it, I think that's very daunting and very scary. And I think that, you sit and you try to meditate and then your monkey mind gets, all in the way. And it's like, then you feel kind of like, oh, why am I doing this? This isn't working. And that can be frustrating. So I think heart math is phenomenal. And I really recommend that to all my patients. I like the Inner Balance app because they can carry it on their phone or their iPad. And I kind of tell everyone, well, you've got to take potty breaks. So every time you take a potty break, I want you to do at least one heart math, 1 3-minute, cycle.
That's a great tip.
Just because, it's like, how can we hack it, right? So that is one tool that I like because people love data. Before, maybe in other generations, data wasn't that inspiring or, people weren't driven by data, but now everyone loves data. So the more data you have, the more you're kind of, I think, empowered to make changes and to also see how you're changing and, have that kind of conversation with your body. So I love heart math. I tell everyone to walk barefoot outside at least 30 minutes a day, 10 to 30 minutes a day. I'm like, go find a chair and sit outside with barefoot. I don't care, what else you do, just do that so they can ground, because I think that grounding is just incredibly healing. Of course, if people can garden, I think that's great, getting your hands in the soil. But whatever you can do to touch the surface of the earth, I think is very calming, to the nervous system. And of course, there's been, a lot of work around grounding and how that also, not only calms increases your parasympathetic response, but also also builds glutathione, So that's something that I recommend. Just being out in nature, even if you're not barefoot, just being outside and feeling the breeze and sitting on a bench or, watching your kids play, not doing, just being. And then, I love Epsom salt baths. So, when I tell my patients, like, I therapeutically prescribe this to you, you need to take a bath every day, an Epsom salt bath, throw some lavender in there, whatever, just get in the tub for 30 minutes. You have to do this. People are like, what? I can do that? How is that? I don't have time for that, but I can make time if you tell me.
Right. So, yeah.
But I think those are kind of just some simple things that people can do.
Yeah. I love that. The grounding thing. I would love to hear what would your colleagues say, or, your fellow medical students, if you could reconnect with them, what would they say if you said, yeah, I have my patients walk around barefoot in their backyard for half an hour? Would they look at you like,
I'd be like, you are crazy earth mama doctor. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, even when patients look at me kind of strange and they're like, what? well, I say, well, okay, when you go to the beach, do you feel pretty good? And they're like, I feel amazing. And I'm like, well, okay, you've probably sat in the sand all day. And yes, you've gotten sunlight and you've had that wonderful soup of minerals in the air. But I think a lot of it is just being outside and touching the earth. There's a true reaction. We were meant to be outside. That's kind of what we were meant to do. And we don't do that anymore.
Right. Yeah. I'm really impressed at how much research there is on, I think they call it Shinrin Roku or foresting in Japan. So a lot of Japanese researchers have done randomized placebo-controlled trials and looked at parasympathetic and heart rate variability and all that. And, had people go what they call forest bathing and just sitting outside in nature. And it's amazing how different that is. So even if you're in downtown Chicago or maybe Dallas or New York, there's parks everywhere where you can take your
Exactly. Go to the park. I mean, even if you live in a tiny, tiny townhouse, or if you live in an apartment, there's usually some grounds with grass. I mean, just literally, if you don't want to walk or stand, take a chair, put your feet on the ground, and just do that. And it's an amazing therapy. What else was I going to? Oh, well, last year wasn't it last year that there was that study about how people were able to reset their insomnia if they were out in nature for like camping for 2 weeks without any electronics?
Wow. I haven't seen that, but I believe it.
Yeah, there was an amazing study that showed that, people with chronic insomnia, they, went camping for 2 weeks, obviously outdoors a lot, and kind of reset everything. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. So do 2 to 3 minutes of heart math when you go to the bathroom, get outside for 30 minutes and put your feet in the dirt or hands in the garden. So maybe let's talk about like food sources of stress and then maybe some of the supplements that you found to really help people to get into that calm state.
Totally. So, American diet, super sad, right? Standard American diet is horrible. It's really crap, quite honestly, unfortunately. And so I think that really all the packaged processed foods are huge inflammatory inputs. I think by now probably most people have heard about gluten and how that's a huge inflammatory input. And but I think just beyond that, I just look in my own life and I look at the elders in my life and my grandmother lived to 103 years old.
Wow.
And they were from Cuba, and they actually came to the United States when they were in their 50s, late 50s, and they were refugees and, they had a hard life here, but even within that, struggle and challenge, they were still able to thrive. And I think that part of it was that they had this amazing foundation. Because the culture was very different than here in the United States. But I think about food, and I think that if you look at foods across the world, you find some basic tenets and, in all these cultures. But I think that, people used to eat a lot of healthy animal fats and parts from snout to tail, so you would have bone broth or stock, which would be kind of the basis of your food preparation. And then, you'd have healthy fats from healthy animals and pastured animals, I guess. And you would get, some organ meat, some muscle meat off the bone. And maybe not very much, but, the animal intake that the people were taking in was, pretty clean and pretty diverse. So I think that, obviously now here in this country, a lot of the animal sources, unfortunately, are very, very sad, unhappy animals that have, not lived in their, natural environment, have had tons of probably illnesses, antibiotics, food that they weren't created to eat. And so that can be a huge inflammatory input, especially because that kind of helps or it plays a role in switching the omega-3 to omega-6 fat intake. So, when you're eating unhappy animals, they're going to make less omega-3s, they're going to make more omega-6s. Omega-6 is very inflammatory. And that's really what all these packaged foods also have. I think that's really what kind of aside from the chemicals and the toxic inputs as far as like colorings and stuff. But I think in general, all of these packaged foods end up increasing your omega-6 ratio. And you have a huge omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, you're going to have inflammation because you're driving those inflammatory pathways.
Let's kind of expand on that a little bit, because I know you did some research on omega-3s and mushrooms at MD Anderson. So were you looking at, ratios in humans and linking that to inflammation and so forth? Maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yes. So I had the opportunity to spend some time there. I took a year off between med school and residency, and spent some time at MD Anderson. And so in their integrative medicine department, which is amazing. But yeah, it was really kind of, the work that I did was mainly looking at the omega-3, obviously the fish oil omega-3 pathways, and kind of working on the specific the specific effects on inflammation and how they bring down inflammation. And so and also working a little bit on medicinal mushrooms and their anti-inflammatory effects, because cancer is an inflammatory process. And so if you can find other inputs or other sources to bring down inflammation, I mean, that's huge. So that was a real wake-up call to me, because when you see those pathways kind of directly having the same effects that like an NSAID would, but without the side effects of an NSAID. I mean, that's very powerful. Why would you take an NSAID if you can take fish oil? So, that was mainly the work that I did.
Nice. So was that on humans or tissue culture?
It was more just research, just like database research. Yeah.
Going back to the animals, and this might be a little out there for some people, but we know the growth conditions for these animals is pretty horrific. And just biochemically, there's all the changes that you see, like histologically different shifts and, omega-6 to omega-3 ratios and inflammatory products, but maybe just energetically. I know you're, into energy medicine and, looking at the whole body, right? I mean, if we're eating a cow that had, or a
horrible life,
had a horrible life, how does that affect us eating their animal protein? Have you ever thought about that? And what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I have definitely thought about that, and it's probably very woo to a lot of people. But I mean, I think that absolutely. I mean, we are energetic beings. We emit energy. Our cells emit light. So of course, if you're going to consume, a being that suffered, then you're probably not going to be getting energetically the I guess what you would call the highest vibration, right?
Right.
So absolutely. That I think is huge.
That's a big deal. Okay. Yeah, great info. Now let's talk about supplements a little bit. I know you do recommend some herbs and different micronutrients. So for since we've been on the path of, stress reduction so far, any high hit rate nutrients you want to share with our listeners?
I end up putting a lot of my, my patients with stress and adrenal fatigue on vitamin C. I think that, 3 times a day, I think that it really can support the adrenal stress response, and also I think can help build collagen networks. And so, most people with adrenal fatigue, or adrenal stress, also have gut, major gut issues, and probably could use some support in their mucosa. So I do vitamin C a lot. I mean, vitamin D obviously is ubiquitous. I mean, everyone I think is pretty much deficient, unfortunately, because we're not outside like we're meant to be, right? Without the clothes. And trying to think, probiotics for everyone, multiple strain, pretty, high dose, high potency. And I'm a very big fan of curcumin. So for people that have a lot of joint aches, that, also that show up on lab, like have elevated HSCRP, for example, or anyone with any like actual pain, I'll put them on curcumin, but I really like Mariva. I think it's a Johns Hopkins patented curcumin substrate. And I find some really great results with that. And fish oil. Yeah.
What's the dosage on the fish oil that you found to be effective?
It depends on the patient. I usually don't put them more than 4 grams, but usually between 2 and 4 grams, especially if they have super, inflammatory conditions. I always look at their platelets though, because it can, cause you have to kind of be careful with the platelets. Usually under 4 grams, you're fine.
I see. So you'll notice a reduction, which would be too thin of blood. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, we want to make sure their platelets are normal, because you don't want to create any extra blood thinning effect that could be, dangerous. Or if they have low platelets, you don't want that to be the supplement that tips them over and then they bleed.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Because of that.
Thanks for sharing that. We haven't talked about that. And the vitamin C, that's never been, we're almost at 100 episodes here, Dr. Alex, and no one's brought up vitamin C for adrenal fatigue. And I remember, don't the adrenals concentrate vitamin C?
Yes. Yeah. And so that's why, and usually it's depleted. And so I always had really good results, with doing that for patients. I mean, the other thing too, is it also supports immunity. So it's just kind of like a really nice, heavy hitter.
Yeah.
And vascular health, it's because of the collagen matrix. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, Russell Jaffe, I don't know if you've ever worked with him or attended some of his lectures, but he's a huge vitamin C guy, and he has this bowel flush with vitamin C, and talks about the relationship between ascorbic acid and glutathione synthesis, and gets really into it. So that's one of these things that he highly recommends. So it's great to hear all these different perspectives, because we get caught up in like what's hot, like resveratrol, like you said, curcumin, but some of these old timers in terms of nutrients, micronutrients are awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's, a lot of anecdotal stories of people that have gotten, really just transformed their health from liposomal vitamin C. High dose vitamin C has been around forever. And it's like, is it Bruce Ames that did all the work? Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Anything else that you want to talk about when it comes to lifestyle, like to convince someone that these small little steps like Epsom salt baths and, putting your feet in the sand and getting dirty a little bit, what other things, like maybe setting up the sleep environment or shopping, what other tips would you like to share?
Yeah, I think just quickly going back to that kind of whole easing your stress piece, I think that that's, like I said, an indulgence, but I think that the most important thing for folks to realize is that if you can't figure out a way to make your body believe you're not being chased by a lion, you're not going to get better, because it's really in that parasympathetic space where all healing occurs and all restoration occurs on all levels. And so, I think that the difference, unfortunately, or one of the challenges, is that in our logical brains, we can always tell ourselves, I'm not stressed. I'm so blessed. I have this, I have a home, I have food, I have, a job. And so for some people, it's hard to recognize that they do have stress because it feels like it's, a space of, ingratitude, perhaps. And so I think that understanding that if you can create, a huge moment for your parasympathetic system to be turned on while you're awake and not just while you're sleeping, because maybe we don't sleep the best way that you can't guarantee, you can't just be sure that all your restoration will happen during sleep. So if you can kind of create an environment where that is just part of your lifestyle, and you can teach your kids that as well, I mean, you're going to be able to handle those environmental inputs or those maybe triggers that more gracefully, that we can't control, that life just brings us. If you kind of have a practice of, just kind of chilling out and, powering down and not having to be so productive all the time and not having to be so on all the time. Yeah. But I think that we've really distanced ourselves from that. I think about my grandparents, and it's like they were professionals in Cuba. They were, my grandmother was a PhD and my grandfather was a lawyer and an accountant, and they had, they taught and they had businesses, but they also strolled around their town and had a lot of, deep connections with people, and, ate their food slowly and had, a lot of community and a lot of time for restoration and they did their work. And so that's really what we've lost. We're so out of balance.
Yeah.
And I think, probably, so I see the pictures in your background. You have kids?
Yes. One 3-year-old daughter.
You have a 3-year-old. So what I see with a lot of my patients is that there's this like achievement need for children as well. It was funny. My husband's a physician as well. Excuse me. And he came home yesterday and he said, I saw a 4-year-old and he knows all the capitals of all the states in the United States. And he was like, that was so impressive. And I was like, yeah, but does that kid know how to play? I mean, right. Does he know how to climb? Is his, nervous system like balanced? Who cares? But I think that we get on this track because we compare people. We're like, oh, well, that kid knows how to read at 5. So I got to teach my kid how to do all these things by this time. And then there's all the extracurriculars that go with that. So as a parent, you end up, chauffeuring your kids around all day long. You put them in all these activities, and then you get even more drained. So I think, trying to also teach your kids that they need restoration, the whole family needs restoration. I think that's really very foundational.
Yeah.
If you can't calm your nervous system down and you can't get that parasympathetic response, how are you ever going to get everything else better? I mean, I think that's really the super missing piece.
I would agree with that 100%. And we've had a lot of guests on the show that have offered a few tips here, and I'll just kind of share. One of them is just for people, like you said, that are very kind of left brain, logical, analytical driven, to schedule time for relaxation into your calendar. So make it a routine, like first thing in the morning, no matter what comes up, work deadlines, projects, kids, you do 10 minutes of heart math, for example, or meditation, yoga.
There you go.
So just put it on the calendar, make that appointment with yourself, and then induce some sort of guilt. And so instead of just saying, do heart math, Mike, or Dr. Alex, right? It's do heart math so you're going to live to 110 and see your grandchildren, something like that.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, because I guess a lot of times people don't tie that, they don't tie that to an endpoint. It's just kind of like, man, I'm going to do it, but I don't know what that's going to give me.
Right. And then along the parenting thing, it's kind of off topic, but since you brought it up, I think it's a great point to kind of dive into. There's a great book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. I think she's at Columbia, and then now she's at Stanford. But anyway, she talks about, this, parenting and so forth, and how a lot of parents with a fixed mindset want their kids to be high achievers so that they can kind of live vicariously through that, because that's like a reflection of their parenting skills. But that's the wrong way to do it. You really want to focus on rewarding your kids for effort, because if you reward them for like innate intelligence, when things don't go their way or they don't do well on a test, they start to doubt themselves,
Totally.
So it was pretty interesting. And also they talk a lot about medicine too, and how medicine is changing, and some really interesting stuff. So parents listening that are kind of into that.
Yes. Yeah. I just think kids are meant to play. I mean, I think they're meant to play really hard and learn things through play and through imitation. So I think that exploration is really important in the early childhood years.
Big time.
I don't really think anything else is that necessary. Obviously, like the foundations of good nutrition and love and that, but I don't think that they have to be doing a lot. I think they just need to be being, and that allows them to, develop their creativity and, their place in the world and the way that they see the world, and, make observations and such. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. So anything else about, the core and the foundations, that you want to share before we go to final questions that we didn't get to discuss?
Oh, sure. So the other things that I think, are really wonderful, obviously, are getting back in the kitchen as much as people can. I think that, there's some people hate cooking. So maybe, figuring out, if you hate cooking, then I don't know what to tell you. Find someone to cook for you, or maybe learn to like it. But I do think that getting in the kitchen and making your own food is very powerful. I think it can be therapeutic, but I just think you actually learn the process, and you can put a lot of emotion and love into that. And energetically, it can be very good for your family and for yourself. So that's what people say, you can taste love and you can taste resentment, right? And then I really, I totally love stock. I think stock is like, I know it's hot right now, but I think that it's hot, and it was hot for like 10,000 generations too. I mean, everything. I think it's hot for a reason. I think that we're meant to eat it, quite regularly. It's a good base for any soup. So make it. In Austin, I have found sources of folks that actually do it as a business or make it as a business that are, pastured sources. And so I sometimes send folks their way if people don't want to make it. I mean, it's not that hard, but it is kind of another task that you have to do. And then it's like, got to strain it. And some people just aren't into that. And then I think there's also like national delivery services that will bring you broth. But it's better to just learn how to do it. And if you have kids, teach them how to do it, so that that can be part of their diet. Let's see here. The other thing, I really think something about community, finding, quote unquote, your tribe, or, just having a group of people that you relate to and that you spend time with. For me in my childhood, that was the most powerful, I think, thing. I mean, when I look back and when I think about the life I want to create for my family, I think about the context of the friends that my parents had. my mom came to the United States when she was 15 as a refugee as well from Cuba. But when my parents got married, they found this whole Cuban community here in Austin. And, they weren't related, but they just became like family. And having that, tribe of people for birthdays and baptisms and, holidays and celebrations, I think really gave me a strong foundation and made me feel just very supported and loved and empowered, along my way. And I think that is missing in a lot of people's lives. I think a lot of people are isolated. Yeah. And I think that because life is so busy, we don't have the time to make those connections. But my argument would be that it's just imperative that we do. It's just so much better for our health to have connection and to, there's so many studies that show that, friendship, a strong friendship with someone is more powerful for your health than, smoking is detrimental to your health. Where if you smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol and, but you have a very strong friendship, that friendship negates those bad health effects. And I'll say that I even see that in a lot of the Cuban elders that I've, grown up around. They smoke cigars like nobody's business, but they live to be 99 years old. But they have a strong community network. I would also argue the diet's pretty good in it.
Sure.
It has a lot of really kind of foundational health and nutritional aspects. But, I think that's kind of like the French paradox too, right? Where there's a lot of alcohol and cigarettes, but there's a lot of community and there's a lot of time to just sit together and talk together and eat together and be together. And I think that is just really critical.
Yeah, it's so important. And I'm sure people listening can think of their kind of jovial friend that's always out partying and hanging out and living a life of just like excess, but has connections and friends in like every city and is always doing something. They look great and they're very healthy and happy. And so but then you have these people that are isolated. They go to the gym, they sleep by a certain time and they eat all this regimented and they don't look so healthy. You're like, wait, what? So I like that you explained
a lot of parasympathetic activation by having those connections, and by having like close friendships and people that, you can laugh with and cry with and everything in between with.
That's great. Yeah, you have to expose yourself a little bit and be vulnerable, I think, and maybe just to meet these new people, because sometimes you bump into someone in the coffee shop and you think, oh, I should have said hi, but I didn't, or you see someone at the gym but you don't say anything. So I think someone listening, just a great tip is introduce yourself to someone new every day, and kind of even if it's scary or uncomfortable, and slowly it'll become easier and easier.
And I think what I've noticed is now that I'm not in a I run my own practice and I'm a little bit isolated in my work. Before it was always easy to make friends because, when you're in school and then you're more school and residency or a job with a lot of folks, it's really, you can usually find people. But if you're a little bit more isolated, a lot of people work from home now or, self-made entrepreneurs. It's harder. It's harder to make friends when you're a grown up.
Right. So what tips do you have?
Well, I think that your tip is really good. Just, when you meet someone that's kind of a kindred spirit, say hello and ask, get to know them, swap numbers or something. And, joining community groups or local meetups. If you belong to a faith, a lot of people make really good connections through faith organizations, but I think you've got to get out of the house and out of the bubble. Right. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of us. And also the other side of that is that the bubble is also where the restoration can happen. So if you have this crazy busy life, then you kind of have to decide and choose, where are the boundaries and when do you need restoration and when do you need community, even though they both kind of feed each other.
Yeah, that's a great point, that give and take. And I've been struggling with this a little bit personally, like, because people want to go out and go out, have wine and stay up late. And then you're kind of thinking like your holistic nurturing side wants to stay in and, sleep and eat. But then I always feel so much better when I go out and hang out with friends. And even if like one night recently, we weren't like drinking excessively, but we're out till like 1:30 in the morning. Yeah. And I just had the best time and got like 6 hours of sleep, but I woke up feeling so refreshed and energetic and like had all these new ideas and so forth. So,
it's like that endorphin release that comes from laughing and being in good company. I think that creates a pretty healthy soup for our brains too.
Yeah. Great tips. That's fantastic. So anything else you want to share? I know you have a bunch of stuff and I don't want to cut you off. So anything we didn't cover before we go?
Let me think. We've talked about a lot, but I think really we ended up talking a lot about stress. And I think that, really, if people can understand that stress is the driver of, obesity and thyroid dysfunction and immune dysfunction and GI dysfunction and depression and memory impairment, then they would probably be more amenable to doing these things that might feel indulgent or a little bit silly. Because, if you can pull back that stress response, you can really help regulate a lot of the things that go totally awry in our bodies. And, we can't really, we try to limit, other toxic and inflammatory inputs right through eating clean food and, trying to, drink clean water and such, and, use green products and, makeup and such. But we can't always control those external factors, but we can try and work on the internal factor and on what's going on inside of us. So that's probably the most powerful way to transform. And, it's right. It's all about perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
Do that mindset shift or change the perspective. Then I think that is something that's intangible, but very valuable to our health. And it's probably the hardest thing to do, quite honestly.
Right. Yeah. It's daily. It's like working a muscle. I think like your parasympathetic tone, or vagal nerve is just like a muscle, like anything else. And so the more you work it, the easier it becomes to become more balanced and have an even keel during stressful events like traffic. For me, it was a real struggle. I mean, when I was like a teenager in early 20s, I would get so upset and sweaty and irritated. But now I know that how, detrimental stress can be for your health, like you just said. And I realized that. It took me a long time to figure that out, but now I figured it out, and heart math has really helped. So for people that try to do these therapies like yoga, meditation, heart math, and they don't like it, it gets better over time initially.
It does. And if that seems overwhelming, just take a nice bath or
right. There you go.
treat yourself to do something where you can just kind of chill out.
Right. Great tips. That's fantastic. So if there was one herb, nutrient, or botanical, for example, your patient comes in and says, my life's a disaster. I want to really work on my health, but I can only afford one thing. It could be even a whole food substance. What would that one thing be and why?
I think that I would probably still say stock, just because it's such a nutritionally dense food. And I would say that I would choose, either an animal stock, but if you can't do that because you're vegetarian or you're vegan and you're not, necessarily ready to make a change, or you don't want to for philosophical reasons, even just a mineral dense soup. I think that we have such nutrition deficiencies and absorption issues. And then I also think that because leaky gut is very prevalent, and people are also really kind of dealing with lots of joint pain. And even I see a lot of people that are concerned about, like their skin kind of wrinkling or sagging. I feel like if you do stock true bone broth, that really kind of takes care of all of those issues, or really supports all of those different facets.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, one thing along those lines, I noticed when I first got into bone broth back in 2007, I did some heavy metal testing of my own and had cadmium, arsenic, lead, mercury. A lot of things were pretty high. I mean, I was, probably not consuming, I know I wasn't consuming filtered water. I wasn't making it with filtered water. Have you noticed any shifts, just out of curiosity, with increases in toxins or heavy metals with broth, or are you seeing the opposite?
Not specifically. I know that about maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, there was a study where they were finding that there was more lead in chicken. I think, was it lead or arsenic?
I think arsenic as well. Yeah.
Arsenic in the rice too.
Right.
Everywhere. I haven't personally. I think that, I almost would argue that the benefits of, getting that kind of, glycosaminoglycans and all of the other nutrients that are you find very bioavailable within, making stock. I almost think that they're just very important. And maybe if you have good detox protocols, that would be just as supportive. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And you're, restoring, gut integrity and all that sort of stuff. But I wasn't necessarily, linking bone broth to heavy metals, but I was surprised they were high and realized that a lot of the metals that I was getting were probably from diesel fume exhaust, actually, because I used to do a lot of bike racing and training outside, and we were just sucking in exhaust for hours and hours every day. So I think that's a big part of it. But I was just curious, as a clinician, you're recommending this to a lot of people. Didn't know if you had seen any feedback that way.
Yeah, I hadn't really specifically, noticed a correlation between the two.
Interesting. Cool. All right. Now let's talk about your morning routine. So you're a mother, you own your own practice, you've double board certified in various aspects of medicine. So what's your morning routine look like, Dr. Alex?
I'll tell you that for any parent, but for any mom, one of my pet peeves, I'll tell you, is that, so my son is 19 months old and I'm still nursing him, but, and he just started sleeping through the night a few months ago. But I will tell you, don't ever tell a new mom that she needs to be getting a full night's sleep, because that is frustrating. I noticed that a lot of our functional medicine colleagues talk about how important it is to get, that full 8 hours of sleep. But I think that a lot of the a huge population of people are, young nursing moms, right? So then we also have to think about that when we're kind of making these broad, statements, because there's some people that really can't do that, so what are some other hacks that you can do for that? So, go to bed earlier than you think, so that maybe you get a couple extra hours in bed in case you do have to wake up 3 times in the night, and then you maybe get an extra hour to sleep in the morning, that kind of thing. But my routine is I try to go to bed by 10 o'clock and then try and get up I usually wake up with the sun, quite honestly. By the time the sun rises, and here in Austin, it's about 6 in the morning right now. So I get about 8 hours. And then what I do when I wake up is actually I stay in bed for probably 5 or 10 minutes, and I just set all of my intentions for the day. And, really try and kind of bring all that goodness in before I get out of bed and take care of my kid that probably wakes up right around the same time calling for money. So that's probably the first thing I do. My daughter is 5. And so when she gets up, she's actually in quite a nice routine now that she's really into the supplements that we take. So she loves her probiotic and she loves her vitamin C. And during the winter months, we do a lot of elderberry. So she's really good about taking her supplements. So she helps me remember to take mine. And we usually have a big breakfast together, all of us together, before my husband goes to work. Then, we try to have a pretty kind of chill morning. And I really, really struggle not to let the morning crush me.
Right.
Because it is brutal.
For a lot of people, yeah, it can be tough.
Yeah, the morning crush is hard.
That's great. I can envision just a big family breakfast and everyone's calm and relaxed. And that's a great way to start the day.
Ish, with little children, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I love it. Little responsible girl. I hope my little girl is good about supplements. She likes food, but she's only 3, so the supplements have been.
No, we actually didn't do too many until just probably in the last year.
Is that right? Yeah, that's cool. All right. So the final question here, Dr. Alex, would be, if you were to rub shoulders with President Barack Obama or a future president, and they turned to you and said, as a board certified family physician and integrative medicine specialist, what sort of lifestyle or health tip would you want me to know to share with Americans? What would you tell them and why?
Wow, that is such a big question. I think I would tell people not to work so much. 40-hour work week, that seems like maybe even a little excessive to me. Can we bring it? Can we work less and play more? I think that is really where the balance issue comes in. And I think a lot of people now are working so much more than just 40 hours a week. I mean, so many people are easily doing 55, 60 hours a week. So if you're doing a 12-hour day or a 14-hour day, when do you have time to restore? I mean, restoration is so crucial. And, we talk about American pastimes and, very kind of idyllically and romantically. So I think that really creating a culture where there is time for restoration, not losing that when we're in this kind of global market and in this, competitive, we talk about competition and achievement so much in this country, but what about just kind of chilling out and restoring ourselves so that we can produce, be better at producing instead of just kind of burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah, that's a great point. And someone who's experienced a 24-hour work shift with being in a medical residency program and stuff like that, that, more is not always better.
Oh no, there's definitely a breaking point. And I think that there's several European countries, and there's been studies that have been done that, people that say work 5 or 6 hours a day and then they know they're going to have the rest of the day off, I think they work so much more efficiently. And I think that there's also, I think in Europe, is it in Germany where they'll just send people to the forest, not in Japan, like you were saying, but I think that, people will go and do some restoration, in nature, even in European countries. We need that. We really need that. We don't have any holidays. Like Americans need holidays. We need vacations. We need 6 weeks vacations. And we also need a lot of maternity leave paid for.
Love it. Great tip, Dr. Alex. So I'm sure listeners are going to want to connect with you online and learn more about your practice. So if you could plug some online resources where people can reach out to you, that'd be great.
Sure. So my website is www.nourishmedicine.com. And you can also find me on Facebook. It's facebook.com/nourishmedicine. And my Twitter handle is @nourishmedicine as well.
All right, Dr. Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show and keep up the great work.
Gosh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to have been here, and likewise to you.
Thank you.